Hello and welcome to a Conquest, the Last Argument of Kings event report. In this event report, we're covering two games played at an event today in Canberra at Jolt Games, where I played the Spires. I mentioned that I've been working on Spires and a Spires army, and I have exactly one unit finished, which is on screen now, and I'm very happy with them. But I was able to borrow an army for today and play a full 2,000 point Spires list. This was going to be either a 2 or 3 round event depending on numbers, and although we had enough players to play to 3 rounds, with I think 7 players over the course of the day, we had some people who had to drop, and that meant we ended up having a clear winner at the end of round 2, which concluded the day actually to everyone's relief because Conquest games can go quite long in an event with new players. So, this is the Spires that I was playing. Let's take a look at the list. So this is my list for today, and it's a very kind of basic bitch Spires list. You will see the list as always in the event, in the description down below, but what we have here is an Under Spire list that is not going too heavy on Under Spire. It's trying to have a little bit of everything. It's not going for tons and tons of brute drones. It's not going for MSU activation spam, which is definitely something that I want to learn to play as Under Spires, but is very challenging. And it isn't overdoing it on like Biomancies or Pheromancies or anything like that. So what we have is a Lineage Highborne who's at 155 points just because she has Cascading Degeneration. She'll be in a unit of Incarnate Sentinels, giving them Aura of Death 4, making them effectively a very well-rounded kind of linebacker unit. They have Cleave 2 and plenty of attacks, they have Aura of Death 4, they're tough, they have high resolve, they're just kind of like a massive ball of good stats and well-rounded offense, being able to combine both Cleave 2 attacks and Aura of Death hits. They wouldn't actually do a ton over the course of the two games today, and I think you can actually play without them, but they are certainly very good, and one heavy unit is easy to bring on turn 3, and they definitely have that kind of like a brute squad vibe. The Avatara also are an excellent unit. Brute drones obviously are kind of like the go-to more generally in Under Spire, but Avatara are just a little bit faster, and that can matter. They have a little bit of cleave, and that can matter, and they're a mainstay, whereas brute drones are restricted. So despite the fact that for their cost, particularly in Under Spire, brute drones are probably more efficient, and in fact they are more efficient and a little bit better. In this case, I'm fine having a unit of Avatara, even though they're just there to unlock the Incarnate Sentinels, and over the course of the day, particularly being speed 7, we'll let them do a few things that brute drones wouldn't be able to. We then have two full combat groups. We have the Pheromancer with Avatara projection, 2 units of brute drones. The Pheromancer would always go in this unit of brute drones here, because it's larger, gets up to 5 models, which makes it harder to break and therefore more likely to be able to regenerate. And then 2 units of Stryx. There's a little bit of an argument that like how many Stryx should you have? Should you have 1 unit, 2 units, or 3 units? 1 unit is actually relatively common. They're very useful, but they are a light unit. They could be replaced with onslaught drones, which are scoring and sort of like will slug it out better. But I really like Stryx, and so I've set myself up to have even 3 units in some lists, 2 in this one. We then have a high clone Executor, who you will see is coming in at 160 points, and that 160 points is because he is loaded to the gills with the shooting equipment. So mutations. He has additional neuroreceptors in order to have 3 mutations, which are Infiltrator variant, Burrowing Parasites, and whatever Biotic Hive, which gives him a colossal. He's only range 14 because he's Infiltrator variant, but that is Volley 3, Barrage 8, Rapid Shot, Deadly Shot, Armor Piercing 1. Which, if that sounds like that's a lot of damage, that is indeed a lot of damage, and he will be playing in the Vanguard Clone Infiltrator unit. We then have a 4-strong unit of Marksman drones, and then 2 units of 4-strong drones, just as mainstays. They're just there to do a little bit of useful stuff, run around, set reinforcement lines, which the Stryx can't, and basically just be like backstops and roadblocks. The odds of them actually being able to make use of their regeneration, which they get from being an Under Spire, is very low because an errant glance will usually kill 2 stands and break them, which prevents healing. But yeah, look, for 90 points, they're definitely worse than Militia, but they're totally fine. You just use them as mainstays. There is an alternate version in one of the lists I certainly want to play in Under Spires where you can take a big unit of 4-screen drones and you put a Cascading Degeneration High Clone Executor in that unit, and that goes pretty hard, frankly, for a unit that is comprised of drones, but not in this list. Only had so many points, and I wanted the Lineage Highborne because, frankly, I could borrow those models. Borrowing models again from Dan, my mate in Canberra, and he does not own enough stands of 4-screen drones in order for me to run the full panoply of the nightmare that is absolute maximal Under Spire, and frankly, for my first event with the faction, wasn't game for it. So, in round 1, we are going to be playing against a Tempered Creed Dweghom list, and the scenario will be Foresight. Let's look at the Dweghom list first. So this is regular local. I'm not sure he's a Vanguard yet, but frankly he should be. Tom runs all of our events. Definitely one of the very good players in Canberra, and this is just a pile of Dweghom good stuff tempered creed. We have a tempered sorcerer with all of the trimmings, focused arcane retinue 3 fire sorcerer. He's in a unit of Fireforged. He has a unit of Hold Warriors and 2 units of Inferno Automata. Inferno Automata are one of those wonderful to have, but not always possible to have, great light pressure units in Dweghom. Where with Dweghom, you do have to, like, all of your units are going to be quite good, but you do have to take your picks. And you're typically going to want like 5 things out of your warbands, and you'll be able to pick 3 of them. In this case, we can see that there's only 1 Tempered Sorcerer and 1 Tempered Steel Shaper, so the list is not generating the maximum amount of tempered tokens that it might be able to, but in exchange, it's getting some quite good early game pressure, some solid mid game pressure, and it's getting heavies from the Hold Regs warband. So these 2 Inferno Automata are going to play with and around the Tempered Steel Shaper in his Ballistae. Tempered Steel Shaper is medium, so he'll make the Ballistae scoring, and they'll all be on the table relatively quickly, with the Steel Shaper providing buffing and early tokens, the Hold Ballista providing range support, and then the Automata providing basically like very mobile and efficient and dangerous against other skirmishers kind of light offensive units. We then have Steelforged, which are just a great medium unit. Obviously, we have the Fireforged and Warriors in the Sorcerer's retinue warband. And then we have a Hold Reg. Now, I don't remember exactly what he was kitted out with, other than at least Tactical 1. It wasn't a ton of stuff. He was relatively cheap. I've sort of guessed him at 120 points here. But he was in a 5-strong block of Thanes with a banner and a Herald of Fire. And the Herald of Fire is important because it means that anything the Hold Thanes are engaged with, the Tempered Sorcerer can cast his spells at. And because the Tempered Sorcerer is Fire School, that's a lot of damage. And it means that, so the risk usually with running these 2 spellcasters, right, the Tempered Sorcerer Fire and the Tempered Steel Shaper, is that you can't always get a ton of tokens, because if your opponent just runs away from the Fire Sorcerer, then he doesn't get to cast any spells because there's nothing in range, unlike like a Magma Sorcerer, for example, or a Stone Sorcerer who could cast lots of spells even if there are no enemies nearby. So you can be a little starved of tokens, but by having these Hold Thanes with the Fire Sorcerer, as long as they get into melee, the Fire Sorcerer can cast, which is not only incredibly dangerous, like the level of force multiplication, like force concentration you get from those Thanes just being like, we're tough and dangerous, and by the way, if you engage us, you will explode. That level of force concentration is incredible, but it also means more tokens for the tempered list. Then we have an Ironclad Drake. Now it's going to be proxied this game by a Hellbringer, but it is replacing, in this list normally there would be a unit of Dragon Slayers, and that would be like Tom's standard, and I think you may even have seen that on the channel before. The Ironclad is, I think it's not always something that you will replace Dragon Slayers with, but it's very appealing to replace Dragon Slayers with it, because it is more generalist. It does a few more things, it's less specialized. Dragon Slayers definitely are tough. They are tougher than an Ironclad Drake is, but they are like expensive, and they're cleave 3, and that's kind of what they do. Like, they're tough and they're cleave 3, and those are very good qualities. But by being just a little bit less tough, the Ironclad Drake gets a lot of stuff. It doesn't have cleave, it's only cleave 2, it's a little less durable, but it's faster, considerably faster at speed 7, and it has Terra 2 to combine with its cleave 2. And that means that against targets that the cleave 3 is not like super efficient against, the Drake will go further. It's just more well-rounded, and it's a monster, which means that it's all the way good to 1 wound, and it can do certain things, like the way that monsters move, because they're just one stand, and like the way that they can get flank charges and stuff, for example, it's just flexible. It's easier to use an Ironclad Drake, provided you use it in support of your other regiments. And I mentioned that last bit because Tom and I had actually played this exact matchup in a practice game on Thursday evening before the event, which was on Saturday, which meant that that game had gone very badly for Tom because he'd overextended a few things kind of quickly. He hadn't realized how Spires range units moving onto the field could kind of just chew up certain bits. We'd seen a couple of occasions where like the Ironclad Drake had just like monstered forward, a Pheromancer had sucked all the oxygen out of its lungs with induced lethargy, and it had just disappeared. Like it had just get annihilated in a volley of ranged fire. And Tom was not going to do that a second time. Tom was going to make me work for it this game. And to be perfectly honest, if you've ever had a tournament event where you kind of like walk away from round 1 being like, that was kind of the finals, wasn't it? That was this round. This was a very tough game against a very skilled opponent, running a very good, just well-rounded list. Let's see how it went. So, for those who haven't played it, Foresight is a very interesting scenario with 5 objective zones. They're spread out across the table. They're there. One of them is behind Great Camber Angle Rob, behind this garrison terrain, here and here. And at the end of each supremacy phase, each player will secretly nominate a zone, which can be any zone apart from the center one, and that zone is worth 0 points to score. But with a twist, if both players nominate that zone, then it is worth double points instead. And what this means is that you can have kind of like mind game situations where you nominate this zone and then your opponent nominates that zone and then your opponent scores that zone and it's worth 4 points rather than 2. So you're like pushed to think about what is your opponent going to do or not going to do, and it can get into the paper scissors rock problem where if you like analyze 3 layers deep, you just begin repeating yourself eternally. But it is definitely interesting and spicy, and it's easy to be like, I was unlucky, or did I just guess wrong? But it's a very interesting scenario. By the end of the game, it tends to push towards an attritional outcome where, like, it's still Conquest, one player will find the way to get ahead. But in very close games, that ability to just sort of judge what your opponent is going to pick and what you should pick as a result and how you play that can give you enough of an edge to make a scenario difference. I think it's probably not my favorite scenario, not because I think it's bad. I think it's a really good and interesting scenario because it adds an extra level of complexity into an already complex game. That step where you have to stop and think about what your opponent is going to pick can add like 5 minutes to a round, and that's actually really significant. Like, I think it probably took us maybe 3 to 4 minutes around every round from round 2 onwards to figure out, like, to do the little stop and pause and around zone 3, 4, 1. And if you add that up over the course of 9 rounds, you get a lot of extra time added to an event. And in fact, this game would go for almost 3 hours on into lunch, which will tell you a little bit about how close it was going to be. But with that aside, saying sort of Foresight, maybe I wouldn't recommend it for event play necessarily. We had time today, and it is certainly an absolute banger of a scenario if the game is very close and you're really getting into it. So for my part, what I've learned to do here with Spires is the pressure I can put on a list, I can put out with this list early is pretty significant. This was, I think, my 3rd game with Spires, period, but even just playing a few games is like, oh, you can really rush lights onto the table in a very significant way. Now, what I'm learning to do here is that you have to read your opponent's list and decide exactly what you want to bring on early or not. And the really big thing here is Vanguard clone infiltrators. I will almost never pick VCI as the unit I'm going to bring on, unless it's a scenario like maybe Maelstrom or something where they can score on the first turn. I will bring them on the first turn actually kind of rarely. And in this case, the reason for that is Inferno Automata. I do not want the VCI coming onto the table until I know where the Inferno Automata are, and I have elements in place to support them, because if those Inferno Automata just march, charge, impact, and then sit there with Aura of Death, and I have to try and like retreat from them, the potential damage that I can suffer is like, it can kill the unit. It can and will, with some bad rolls, wipe the unit out. And given that the Inferno Automata cost only a little bit more than half the cost of that VCI regiment, because the High Clone is so expensive, don't let that happen. So in this case, we've got fairly limited progression from Spires. I have rolled quite poorly for my reserves, but that's kind of okay in this circumstance. My Stryx have yeeted on here, and my Force-Grown Drones have yeeted on here. The Stryx are just there to pressure the mid-zone and draw some things towards them, and nothing else. For Tom's part, everything has survived. Hasn't failed a roll, and so he is building pressure in this part of the table, which I quite like. So we've got Inferno Automata moving up here, the Steel Shaper moving up here, and the other Inferno Automata moving up there, and the Steel Shaper will cast a spell to generate a token, setting Tom up quite well for scoring. Cool. This is just, he has more stuff in the early game than me. I have to seed the early pressure, and Tom has earned that by a combination of good dice rolls with these reinforcements, but also building a list where that can happen. Round 2, the action begins to heat up considerably. So all of my lights will turn up. Actually, no, I think a unit of Force-Grown Drones won't, but the VCI and more Stryx will turn up this round, as will my Pheromancer and my Warlord, my Brute Drones, and my Marksman Clones. For Tom's part, the only thing of his that will arrive is the Fireforge, but he's happy getting them onto the field early, because again, they have that Arc Node situation where they're going to move forward, they're going to pressure things, and then, even if they're not in a part of the table that's particularly relevant, they'll be able to contribute via the Thanes. And we see that here, where the Fireforged have come on this side of the table, to bully my poor Force-Grown drones, who moved up before they did. Now, they're not in range of the Force-Grown drones, but next turn they will be able, the Force-Grown drones won't be able to escape. And that means the Sorcerer is going to just blow them up and get 2 tokens for free. So I'd move these Force-Grown drones up here to kind of provoke a response, which worked, so that's good. But it provoked a response from a piece chosen very cleverly by Tom, where these Fireforge would be able to contribute to the battle, even if I'm just like, okay, cool, the Force-Grown drones are dead, you can have that zone forever, I don't want to fight you. If Tom hadn't had the Arknode, the Herald of Fire, in the Thanes, I would be super happy leaving these here forever, but unfortunately, he's a very good player, and he's built a list that can play, sort of like, leave these guys over here and play other parts of the table with the Thanes. Now, otherwise, this has been a good turn for me. I'm bringing some Stryx on, and in fact, what I will end up doing is I will bring a unit of Stryx on here, and these Inferno Automata will attempt to charge. These guys will attempt to charge these Stryx, and they will fail. These Stryx will countercharge them in the flank and kill a stand for their trouble. This is going to set up, like, this engagement is okay for Stryx. The Inferno Automata are going to beat them, but you can sort of, like, because of lethal demise, and particularly with the flank charge, the Stryx will probably survive a while. Over here, these Inferno Automata have come through the woods and engaged these guys. No impact, the woods are hindering, obscuring, and obstructing. This is perhaps a slight overextension because it's enabled my Vanguard clones to march, shoot, which because they have Vanguard they can do, and then reform to get the High Clone Executor into the zone. And that actually has rolled like absolute garbage, and I think it hasn't even killed a stand of Inferno Automata, which is a little bit bad, but nevertheless, the Inferno Automata aren't going to go through the Stryx in one go without inspiring. It's going to be fine. We also bring the Marksman Clones up here, and I think they might even, yeah, so they have only moved up 5, which is enough to get them a shot, and that's done a wound. That's finished off one of the stands of these Inferno Automata, which has pushed the Stryx forward. So, alright, we're getting runs on the board. I think we've even pushed through might have used a couple of tokens. Nothing is particularly damaging. This flank is shaping up to look kind of bad, but we are winning, as you would kind of expect, given how many lights we have. We are winning just, it's a fragile position, the scrap between the light and medium units over sort of the upper flank of the table. As we move into turn 3, Tom's entire army is going to arrive. I'm going to still have a unit of Avatara off the table, but otherwise all of my stuff will turn up as well. And this is where sort of basically the commitment happens. And this was a very, very difficult reinforcement allocation to make, and I'm genuinely not sure if I made the right decision or not, and it was a really difficult one. So I mentioned before that we've got these Fireforged here, right? They're going to blow up these Force-Grown drones. If I want anything on this side of the table, I need to move things onto it. Now, I've got tons of stuff turning up. I can do that, but I'm not entirely convinced I want to bring, like, where do I put my big unit of Incarnate Sentinels is the question. Do I commit them to the fight against the Fireforged, or do I just stay away from them, fight a holding pattern, and like try and find some way to annihilate the Thanes when they arrive, noting that I don't know where they'll arrive? And I end up making the decision over the course of the turn to bring the Incarnates and one unit of Brute Drones there. I've got this unit of Marksman Clones that are sort of like going to serpentine forward, and they have the potential to help contribute to this fight over here as well. But I'm very aware that this is a fragile situation, and I think it's possible that I should have fought much more of a rear guard. In terms of Tom's like expendable elements, he's already bought his warriors on here. He's going to bring them on to deal with the Stryx. In fact, there might even have been some kind of like weird lapse. No, this is all worked out. Yep, this is correct photography. It's just like, this was a difficult one, and I ended up making the decision to contest the entire width of the board, but it's possible I shouldn't. It's possible I should have tried to kind of like draw a line here and sort of like just hold there and stay away from the Fireforged, but I suspect that if I'd done that, the Fireforged would have occupied this position here, just towed into this zone, and we would have ended up in a very similar situation. So look, this is what it is, and we commit to this flank. We commit to this flank with a unit of Brute Drones and Avatara. Elsewhere on the table, the light and medium fight goes very well for me, and what actually happens is that these Stryx over here are going to just completely blow through the Inferno Automata by themselves. The Automata will end up, they'll activate first, they'll deal some damage, I'll activate the Stryx, I'll take a little bit from Aura of Death, all of that will lethal demise back onto the Inferno Automata, which will do like a ton of damage to them. The Stryx will regenerate and attack and do it, actually I think they even rally, and then just make a clash that just does like 4 hits. And so they wipe out the Inferno Automata by themselves, which I'm like, that wasn't the plan, I had a whole unit of Vanguard clones there. But dead Inferno Automata are still dead Inferno Automata, and again, the same thing has happened over here between the Stryx. I think it's just the Stryx again. They pick up extra attacks from the Pheromancer, they make a charge, they make an attack, blah blah blah, they blow through. And so we end up with some Stryx standing here and some Stryx standing here, and all of the Inferno Automata are dead. There is going to be a bunch of other movement. I will move the Brute Drones forward. They will touch this zone. And I basically sort of have to be kind of happy with that. I do not yet have my full army committed because the Avatara haven't arrived. And I think in retrospect, it might have been better for the Avatara to come up here rather than the Brute Drones. I think they would have been better suited to this fight. I chose to bring the Brute Drones on because I chose to bring the Brute Drones on. I wanted card flexibility. So, that's fine and fair enough. For Tom's part, he commits his heavies flexibly. So early in the turn, the Steelforged will move up here, leaving this big gap here for the Ironclad Drake, which I think is really clever, because it means that I don't know where the Ironclad is going to go, and all it does is it just pushes the Steelforged back slightly. The Ironclad commits up here in response to these elements, or really just to support the Fireforged, and if I deployed nothing here, then it would have just continued to run across the board and sit in this zone. So I now have a very dangerous heavy supporting kind of like an anvil unit, and this is the nightmare. Like this is just horrifying to have to fight, because if I go into the Fireforged, the Drake's going to hit me in the flank, and the Drake flank, and if the Drake hits me in the flank, like these Sentinels are tough, but they are not going to cop it from both the Fire Sorcerer and the Drake, just ripping them into shreds. They will go straight down. And so I'm in a very sort of fragile position here. And Tom also cleverly has brought his Thanes on here. They're in a 4 wide, 2 deep formation right now. And they're going to put a lot of pressure on the sort of the elements I have over there. Because really all I have in that space are the Vanguard clone infiltrators with this big forest in the way and a bunch of light crap. And I'm going to hope to use the light crap to push them back and to just sort of like pin this unit in place. But even that is dangerous because they're very easy to unpin. Because if I just run Stryx into them, what is going to happen? The Fireforged Sorcerer is going to blow them up, and they won't even deal lethal demise because it's the Fireforged, the Fire Sorcerer, that's doing all of the damage. So I have to set up in a way where I'm ablating these guys back just by using things like the Stryx and the Force-Grown Drones, but not charging. I have to force Tom to charge me, otherwise it will be easy for him to unpick himself. And so these Thanes are going to be a long-term problem. I can throw units into the breach to delay them, but killing them is going to be really difficult. So, into turn 4, and if it looks like the situation hasn't developed, that's because I can't roll a charge this game to save my life. I'm going to fail, I think, every single possible charge that I can, except for a single rerollable 3+, or every charge that auto-succeeds. And that's going to suck, but it is a thing that happens. So in terms of sort of how things have developed, Tom has the initiative on this, like he has the advantage on this flank, and he knows it. He moves the Fireforged forward, and he puts a whole bunch of damage into the Incarnate Sentinels. Frankly, I am lucky to get away with just 3 wounds there, and the Drake postures. I attempt basically a bunch of moves forward. I actually, so this is a double march to get this unit in here, as predicted. That puts Tom at about 11 inches from my Incarnate Sentinels. They go for a charge, eating a 4, they fail. It's a thing that happens, that's fine. I think I move 2 inches forward. The Brute Drones also go for a charge into the Drake. Like, it's very long range. I think I need a 6 rerollable. I fail, that's totally fine. And I'm making these rolls because it's like the Incarnate Sentinels I could have march charged. But if I had March Charge, I get no impact attacks. I have to hope I activate next turn. And I am getting Aura of Death hits, but I'm not contesting the zone. And if I move the Incarnate Sentinels forward, you freaking better believe that I have to March Charge the Brute Drones forward, because if I don't put something in the way of that Drake, then this gang up is going to happen. And if I do that, then I'm not scoring the zone. So I make these long-range charges on the grounds that if they fail, well, that's fine, they failed, and they leave me in the zone, and if they succeed, then the payoff is high. Was this the right play? I don't know. I think it's very possible that just running to hug both regiments would have been correct, but I wanted to be a little more conservative with that and drag this situation out. And the real actual deciding reason why was that as long as sort of like the line between these armies sort of stayed here and here, the Marksman Clones were going to be able to contribute. But if things got pulled too far out of position, they wouldn't be, and so I left things like that. In the center and the top part of the table, the Stryx will make a charge and then get annihilated by the Warriors, or the Warriors will take some damage from Lethal Demise and from the Marksman Clones and get dropped down to 1 stand and broken. And then we have basically some fairly solid footwork, where Tom hucks the Steelforged forward, and he pulls the the Tempered Sorcerer back. And this is, again, this is a nice play. And the reason why this is a nice play is that that Tempered Sorcerer, he's a medium stand in a light regiment, which makes him scoring. But those Ballistae are not tough. They're only like their defense 3, 2 with their shields. They're only resolve 2 because he doesn't add to their resolve because he is indifferent to life. But so they're really at risk. They get early points, they score you early tokens, but there is a moment in the game where you have to pull them back and put something in front of them so they can continue to do all of that work. And Tom gauges this expertly. This is the turn, and he does it. They pull back, the Steelforged go forward, and now there are Steelforged in the way of this unit of Ballistae. Okay, the Ballistae can't shoot over the Steelforged, but that will almost certainly remedy itself quickly enough. I am, however, able to jam up the... by moving these Stryx, they regenerate a little bit, they move forward, and I'm able to jam up these Thanes. They don't even take the charge, they don't want to, because they're going to end up in an awful position if they do. They just reform and sort of like begin getting themselves ready, and other things move forward to occupy position. So the Avatara come around to off the flank to occupy this. The Infiltrators move forward to take some shots. And one of the things that I do is I'm able to get my order correct here, and kind of I'm using my activations a little bit here. The Pheromancer is actually able to pop -1 defense on the Steel Forged, and then I actually set up for quite a lot of like damage here. I take a re-rollable 3+ charge with the Brute Drones, but you will see that there are no Brute Drones in melee with the Steel Forged. That would have done an absolute ton of damage. Like, yes, the Steel Forged are defense 4, but down to defense 3 with the Pheromancers, whatever it is, -1 defense. The Brute Drones all had 6 attacks because of the Pheromancer's Pheromancy. Like, I was set up for just a wonderful charge, and all I needed was to succeed on a rerollable 3+. Doesn't happen. Rolled 2 2s. That's a thing that happens sometimes. So they whiffed it. I was able to put some damage into the Steel Forward, just a little bit with the Infiltrators, and move some other things forward. But that was kind of non-ideal. I would have been quite happy with this entire situation, even with the Thanes, right? The Thanes ready to counter-assault. If I'd blown those Steel Forwards out, I would have felt like I was in a pretty good position, because if the Thanes had come in, there's a lot of healing you can do in these Brutes, and I would have been able to just like pump shots into the flank of the Thanes with the Vanguard Clone Infiltrators. But that didn't happen. It was what it was. I'm still scoring quite well. I haven't mentioned the score up until now. It's Tom and I have been doing pretty good jobs of like picking around each other in terms of the zones. I've secured by this point, end of turn 4, a slight lead. The score at this juncture is 10-6, which I know because I have a notebook now. I have finally got myself a notebook. It's the best friend for a Conquest player. Don't try and keep score any other way. Get a notepad, write things down. It's much easier, and in this case, it's also very helpful for marking down which zones you have picked. So turn 5, and we will see that this situation is continuing to go poorly. That's right, the Incarnate Sentinels have gone from failing a 4+ charge to failing a 2+ charge. That sucked. That was really bad. This whole setup, I was ready to come in, make the 2+ charge, deal a bunch of damage, duel out the bloody Sorcerer, breaking the regiment, forcing them to rally. Aura of Death hits, might even have killed them. Just needed to roll a 2+ on the dice. Didn't. Sad trombone music plays, that's fine. The Incarnate's now job is to just score the zone for a while and slowly get fireballed to death. The Brute Drones do charge into the big boy, we've pushed him off his base in order to fit them, and they do a ton of damage actually. They do like 10 wounds, and then he tears 2 of them apart and breaks the regiment, which not entirely surprising. Cleave 2, Terror 2 is really good. He does take a lot of damage from their attack, and I think he'll take even more damage from Marksman Clones who are able to arcing fire over there, and they leave him on something like, I think if we look at that, yeah, he's taken 15 damage over the course of this turn. So he's probably going to die next turn, which is a win for me because he's very scary, but he's drawn a lot of fire, and again, this situation is just very sad. Now, in the center and on the flank, things are going a little better, and we can see that the Steel Forged have died. I was quite willing to just have the Brute Drones face tank that, because I can really heal the Brute Drones basically forever, and indeed, the Steel Forged came in, and the Brute Drones copped it on the chin, took a bunch of damage, healed some of it back, Pheromancer healed back more of it, and then we just blew up the Steel Forged in response. Pheromancer used Induced Lethargy. I think we even had the Vanguard Clones contribute, the Infiltrators contribute the firepower, and that put them down. The Stryx made an early charge into the, whatever these guys are called, the Ballistae. Didn't do very much damage, but they pulled some tokens off in order to keep them alive. But importantly, they then prevented a big volley into into anything that might have been like terrible for me to happen. And the Thanes have countercharged, but because of the very awkward angling, they've only been able to get one standing contact. They haven't quite killed the Stryx. They will absolutely kill the Stryx next turn. Even the Sorcerer might just blow them up. But it's taking just enough time for Tom to unpick things that I've got the Steelforged kill. So points are beginning to accumulate, and this turn seizing the middle sort of again, I'm beginning to establish an advantage. We're actually going to end up going end of turn 5. The score is going to widen because Tom will pick zones poorly, and what it'll mean is that I will be scoring all 3 of these. And that gives you, if you're securing like quite a lot of additional zones, you get a big bonus. I think I go up to 15 points to Tom's 6 in this zone because he's not able to score anything. So to progress kind of rapidly through the remaining turns, this game does go all the way to turn 10. This is sort of the end of where I had pictures. We can sort of see from here, we can go turn 7 and then turn 8. Violence ensues, but I am able to just barely come out on top. The Drake is going to die to Marksman Clones. The Incarnate Sentinels will finally make the charge on a 1, but they'll do no damage. They're charging through the forest, there are enough of them left, and they're just going to get completely exploded by the Fireforged. And that is the end of the sad saga of failed charges for them this round. However, with the Drake down, the Fireforged face kind of like a long trek to actually get around to contribute to any more of the battle, and during that time I'm able to win decisively over here. We will see the Thanes will break through the Avatara, and they will eventually get to the Vanguard clone Infiltrators, which will then get completely exploded by fireballs from the Tempered Sorcerer, but then we will eventually have a turn where the Brute Drones come into their rear and there's a phrase, and damage will sufficiently mount. The Thanes will eventually be brought down. The Tempered will move around this way and will blow this unit up with a combination of fireballs and coruscation. But that's sort of the end of the game. We're going to end the game with the Tempered sort of sitting here, and then my Brute Drones sitting over here, and everything else dead. But everything has died in such a way that I've been able to, because I won the battle with the lights and the mediums on this flank, and I held long enough here without giving up any scoring. Although my army is extremely exploded, and Tom has ended the game with quite a few more points on the board than I do, I think I end up with two Brute Drones and a Pheromancer alive at the end of turn 10, the scoring has gone my way significantly over the last few rounds. And indeed, we've had a couple of turns of like big scoring turns because I'm on just all of these zones up here. And that's significant. So the score is going to end at the very bottom of turn 10. The game was live all the way through. There were things on the board, things to be destroyed, points to be scored. But the score is going to end 34-11 in favor of the Spires. And this was a very tough game. We went to lunch after this, and I kind of sat and stared into my coffee and managed to mentally regroup going into the second round. Now, the good news going into the second round is that with Tom defeated, I was probably not going to have to play anyone that was quite as ruthless to have to deal with. In particular, because Daniel Pronin, who was one of the players in this event, had to head back. He has a recently has a recent newborn, and there was only so much that he could do in terms of playing, and his first round was an absolute cracker as well. So we ended up, I'm going to play into City States in round 2, and let's look at that list. So here is the round 2 opponents list. This is City States. City States had just finished defeating Spires in round 1, playing into a fairly well-rounded Monster Mash Lineage Highborne-led list. And so they'd wet their blades on a whole bunch of Spires monstrosities and now got to play into the Under Spire. This is a continuation of local Michael's list that we've seen on the channel, I think at least once, maybe twice before. Lovely painted green, white, and gold. But in this case, he's finally got himself an Eidolon. And he's been experimenting basically with what does he build apart from like the Aristarch Polemark in his continued somewhat damned quest to make an Aristarch Warlord work. Now, I don't hate the Aristarch Warlord. I've spoken to this in the past. I think the +1 speed off of the strategic stack is quite nice. I think the Aristarch's orders are quite nice. But that's where my compliments for the Aristarch end, and if he gets anything resembling at any point a rework to his Warlord ability, he'll become much more competitive. As it is, he allows for some interesting like edge advantages, particularly with the Agema going a million miles off the back of lighter alloys plus his Warlord ability. He's not quite there yet. You will never use the retreat ability to any kind of effect. This is an approximate reconstruction, but this is basically what we have. We have an Aristarch with the Primodynamic Globe that isn't going to matter against Spires, but is very, very relevant if you have things like, say, the Old Dominion running around with a bunch of Karez. He's in a big unit of Thorakides with the Relentless Blows Officer and a Minotaur Hasburst. Then we have some Saturoi and some Selenoi. The Saturoi have the Assassin, so they are quite dangerous and scary. We have a Polmark, and he's kitted out to the gills. He has lighter alloys, Atlantis Spear, all of that kind of stuff. Architects 3, so the unit will do impact attacks, and he's in a unit of 5 Agema, and this is an all-star unit. It's very expensive, mostly because the Polmark is so expensive, but they can do things that no other unit can do. There's nothing in the game that is as fast as them. They are literally the upper watermark for speed, I think possibly accepting. Look, even Stryx with a Pheromancer buffing their speed are faster in absolute terms, but can't do the things this unit can do because it has the fluid formation. Very dangerous, very powerful, very good. Then we have some Haspus, always useful, some Therians, always useful, and we have an Eidolon with a unit of Thorakides. Now this is Thorakides with a Minotaur in it, and the Eidolon is really interesting here. So Michael has been experimenting with like Thorakides and a scoring character in a couple of different ways. There are multiple medium characters you can put in Thorakides. You can put an Aristarch in Thorakides. I think you can put a Polmark in Thorakides, and you can put a Mechanist in Thorakides. And Tom has actually, so not Tom, Michael has actually recently been experimenting with a Mechanist, but a Mechanist is really bad until Clockwork Hoplites exists. Like, literally don't play the Mechanist at all until Clockworks exist. That is the Mechanist's reason for being. With the recent release of the Eidolon, however, we have a new option to put in Thorakides, because an Eidolon, despite being a brute, can join an infantry regiment as does not change their height. They're still size 1, so they're not any easier to shoot. And the Eidolon goes freaking nuts. Like that thing can be very, very dangerous. It just picks +5. I think it has 9 attacks if you pick the +5 attacks at the beginning of the round. And yeah, it's just a combat warlord, but it has 9 attacks. That's a lot of damage. And it's medium, it can keep up with the Thorakides easily, and the Thorakides themselves can get onto the board, they can score early potentially. Like, cool. Okay, now they are just a little fragile. I think the regiment is Defense 2 with shields and Resolve 3. It's nothing particularly special. And the Thorakides themselves, really all of the damage from that regiment comes from the Therian, but now it comes from the Therian and the Eidolon. So as long as there are some Thorakides alive and those two dudes are punching on, you have actually a surprisingly dangerous light scoring regiment. That's pretty neat. So I like that, and I actually like the rest of this list. I have a lot of good things to say about this list. But this game is going to be an absolute showcase in some of the degeneracy that can happen when Spires gets the wind in them and just keeps going. We'll move through it quickly. So we are playing, I think, Last Stand is the name of the scenario, but whatever it is called, this is like a lane scenario. We have 2 zones here, we have 2 zones here, and we have 2 objectives here, which means that it's basically very easy to fight in these directions and concentrate your force in these directions. Now, I like everything about this scenario except for the fact that a single unit of 3 dudes can stand there and score both zones. And surely that's not legal, you say. But it says in the rulebook that a single regiment can't store 2 zones. Yeah, it says that in the rulebook, but it doesn't say it in the tournament scenario pack, which takes precedent in this particular case, and the devs have confirmed that. Yes, yeah, guys, don't do that. This is kind of dumb. But in this case, it was going to happen. It was going to matter significantly. And actually, in the Spires v Spires that would be playing out on another table, we would see the game end with one regiment standing there and one regiment standing there, staring at each other for the entire rest of the game. So, not sure that is the best design, but I do enjoy how the scenario really forces you to fight in these like tight lanes, and things that contribute to them are still pulled back toward the center. I think that's cool, and it's a very unique scenario design. So the thrust of the scenario I really like. The specific mechanical 1 regiment of 3 stands can score 2 zones, I really don't. That is what it is. Now, in this case, I've looked at my opponent's army list, and there is nothing he can bring on early that scares me necessarily in the same way that the Inferno Automata do, so I have no concerns bringing my Vanguard clone Infiltrators on, which means this time around, we're hitting the ground running with our lights. For his part, Michael is going to bring the Thorakides and the Selenoi Rangers on here. The Selenoi will garrison this terrain for the extra height, and it's 16-inch range. It's pretty nice. They'll get plenty of shots. And the hoplites, Thorakides will move forward, ready to kind of contest this zone. For my part, I will be bringing on Stryx over here, Vanguard Clone Infiltrators here. Again, I'm happy doing this because they have the Stryx in support, and then a unit of Force-Grown Drones whose only job this entire game is going to be to run to this objective and punch it over the course of 3 or 4 turns, which they will do admirably. Now, at the moment, you're like, okay, equal up, like, the Spires have probably got more points on the field, but it's not a huge difference. It's like, yeah, it's not a huge difference, but the combination of Stryx and Vanguard Clone Infiltrators is much, much better suited to this fight in terms of, and the activation advantage that I have makes me much better suited to this fight than the pieces that Michael has to play the same battle. Michael is going to be forced into sort of like relatively conservative play, which is going to get especially bad when we see what happens next turn. So the decision Michael makes on turn 2 is that he wants to bring his Saturoi on. He wants to bring them on because he wants to force a response from me, and he doesn't want to leave them because they can't charge the turn they appear, which would be just ridiculously dangerous. They were very good in his previous game against city-states, I guess against Spires. They were actually able to get into combat with, break, and then duel out. I think they killed a Biomancer in a big unit of Force-Grown Drones by hitting them in the flank, breaking the regiment, and then dueling him out. That's super cool. But in this case, so he elects to bring the Saturoi on because he wants to exert some pressure, and then he fails every single remaining reserve roll, which means that the only things he has access to play with are the Saturoi, the Inquisitor, the Thorakides, and the Selenoi Saturoi. That is not enough things in his strategic stack, particularly given that I have my other unit of Force-Grown Drones, and my Pheromancer, and my Brute Drones, and my Avatara turn up. And so he has to kind of make a bit of a terrible choice here. Now, early game, I just pressure, right? These Stryx are going to end up... These ones here are going to hook all the way across the table. In fact, I can just wait out. So I just move things on this side of the table. I move the Avatara forward into the zone. 14 inches is enough to get into one of these big zones, by the way, whereas speed 6 going 12 inches is not. So the Avatara moves forward, the Brute Drones move forward, and that means that, okay, cool, look, if the Saturoi turn up over here, then they're going to come into the flank of the Brute Drones or the Avatara. That's not the end of the world. I will just turn around and punch them to death. I can take that fight because I can heal quite a lot with these regiments. We'll be fine. So these things all happen first. These drones move forward and do a wound. These drones walk onto the table, right? I just drown out Tom's activation, Michael's activation. So all he does is he just has to move the Thorakides up to this zone to try and score it. And then he sort of sits there with the Saturoi. He does a wound to this objective, and that then gives me free reign, right, to have these Stryx have picked up +1 speed from the from the Pheromancer, so they hook all across the table here and engage the garrison terrain, and then these Stryx move forward, and they just sit there in this zone, contesting against the Thorakides. There are more of them than there are of Thorakides, so even with the medium stand from the Eidolon, that's fine, he's not scoring. And that means the Saturoi have had to make a decision. And this is a terrible decision because if they come on, they've only got 12 inches on either side of the table, right? They can't come on more flexibly because this scenario limits reinforcement lines. If they come on here, they will probably get a charge next turn and they'll go into my Brute Drones. And then I will just reform and fight them and eventually kill them. And so he doesn't elect to do that. He elects to come on over here. And that's a unit of Vanguard Clone Infiltrators. And he knew on paper, like, he's like, yeah, I know, it won't be that bad, right? And no, it's that bad. It's really that bad. Don't ever do this. He should probably have like hugged the absolute table, but there's just not enough space here. I had put this unit of Vanguard Clone here, Infiltrators here, very, very intentionally, knowing that if the Saturoi came on, I would have a response. And so I just fluid formation, turn 180 degrees, and just blew them up. They just died. They are evasion 2 with 4 wounds. They are just not going to cop a full volley from VCI at short range. And down they went. That's just threat removed, and it isn't even a problem because these VCI will just be able to turn around next turn. And so that's just a unit down. I've developed the board. I'm scoring 2 zones. Michael is scoring none, and we can sort of see how the game is beginning to go. So turn 3, my gang's all here. Michael finally gets some reinforcement rolls, but critically the Agema don't turn up. Now, he really could have chosen to bring the Agema on, and frankly, he should have. At this point, things are going to be rough for him. He's really far behind. It's difficult. I'm going to get a really big scoring turn pretty soon. and the pressure I am exerting is significant. But if he'd brought the Agema on, he might have been able to do one turn earlier what they would end up doing. As it was, they're not going to arrive until next turn. It's going to be a while before we see them actually develop some heroism, but they will be heroic by the end of the game. Otherwise, we're just going to move through this. Lots of things, like it's just a development. I'm pushing forward in this direction. I'm going to score 2 zones. These Haspests come all the way forward off the strategic stack, which means they're able to move 21 inches because the Aristarch's on the battlefield. That's super cool. The Hoplites move here pretty much just to clean out the Stryx, while the Therians come up along, intending to charge and destroy this objective next turn. I move the Marksman Clones forward, I just continue to pressure, the Incarnate Sentinels turn up here. The Incarnate Sentinels will take one fight and kill one, like they'll end up killing one thing with their impact attacks the entire game, while these Force-Grown drones slowly work on this objective. Some drones have moved up behind the Vanguard Clone Infiltrators, so I think took some shots and fought some Selenoi. The Selenoi just legged it. They did not want to keep fighting Stryx, and they just left the garrison. You can do that. You just spend 2 marches and you just leave the garrison. There's no withdrawal penalty. You just walk away. It's the only time in the game that you can just walk away from a melee attack, which is interesting actually. Garrison terrain. I hate it, but I admit that that's actually like that's pretty cool. The Thorakides are completely dead. They go down to the Vanguard Clone Infiltrators. That's a couple more points for characters, and I get the coveted 3 zone scoring, which gives you a big bonus this turn. So I'm pushing forward. I'm really not, and even if Michael like really rolls super well for the rest of the game, I'm developing such a scenario lead, and I'm just doing like enough damage that there's just too much material at this point. I've been able to just whittle down all of his pieces early on, and those losses, like, ultimately it's not a colossal amount of his army, but it's enough. It's enough that I am able to just dictate tempo for the entire rest of the game. So turn 5, the Agema finally turn up, and they have come on over here, and they are hugging the table edge basically to stay away for now from the Vanguard Clone Infiltrators. The Stryx are going to die. They get charged by the Hoplite block and killed. Yep, that's totally fine. The Minotaurs are going to charge and destroy the objective, and then get charged in turn by the Avatara and killed. Avatara in the flank of Minotaurs when the Avatara have +1 attack from the Pheromancer. They don't like that up them. These Haspests are trying a very bold maneuver of coming all the way up and around here. They're going to be going after the the Marksman Clones, and the Marksman Clones sort of like tuck in to stay out of their line of sight, fire a volley, but I think they do all of maybe 1 wound, but the Brute Drones move to respawn. And I can have this Brute Drone Pheromancer unit just do this, just be like, yeah, no, I'll just put them over there, it's going to be totally fine, because I've got so many resources. We can see more Brute Drones moving up onto this zone, the Incarnate Sentinels moving up onto this zone. The pressure that I am exerting is immense, and this won't be a 3-turn, no, this will be another 3-turn scoring, where in this case I control this one, and this one. So again, scenario lead. Like this Hoplite block, all I need to do is stall them out for the rest of the game, and I'm going to attempt to do that. And then I have to deal with these Haspests, and even if everything else goes perfectly, there's just not enough happening over here. This has been a rough game for the city-states. So moving into turn 5, we're reaching the end of the photographs that I took, but I'm going to break down basically what happens over the remainder of the game. These Haspests will wheel around, charge, and do a fair bit of damage to the Marksman Clones, but not enough. They will get annihilated by the Brute Drones, who actually I think end up being able to just charge, clash, and then charge, impact, and then reform away, because between the melee attacks from the Marksman Clones and the impact attacks from the Brute Drones, I'm able to kill the Haspests. Since the Marksman Clones are medium, that will free them up to score this zone for the remainder of the game, while the Brute Drones move up over here. The Avatara will come into the Hoplites, and although they will lose that fight over the course of many, many turns, I will get the Brute Drones far enough forward that the Pheromancer is able to support and just do a little bit of healing for a couple of turns, which means that basically for the rest of this game, this unit of Hoplites is sitting there fighting Avatara, slowly weakening. These Incarnate Sentinels will charge forward, impact attack the remainder of the Selenoi to death, and then eventually move back in this direction and sit in that dumb straddling position. But we will see some heroics. We will see the Agema do what they were born to do, which is very cool stuff. So if we have a quick look at the formation I've adopted here, you can see that we've got these not bound clones, we have these Force-Grown drones shielding this unit of Vanguard Clone Infiltrators, kind of just body-blocking charges. But here's the thing about Agema coming off the strat stack with the Inscription of Lighter Alloys. You can't stop them. They're gonna find the charge if the charge exists, because they go to speed 9. And so what happens is that these Agema fluid formation out to like this position, move 9 inches up here, get a 3+ rerollable charge, and then come into the unit of Vanguard Clone Infiltrators. And they, just with their impact attacks, they do a ton of damage. They have impact attacks because of the retinue of the cities that the Polemarch has. And then the Vanguard Clone Infiltrators, they just have to try and pull back to open up the charge for the Brute Drones, and they annihilate themselves, making the withdrawal. I've taken enough damage already from the impact attacks that a bad roll plus some bad resolve rolls wipe the Vanguard Clone Infiltrators out. The Brute Drones are going to go in, and obviously with Inscription of Lighter Alloys, the defense of the Agema is massively lowered. So the Brute Drones will do a ton of damage. They'll kill something like 4 stands. And then next turn, that Soul Agema plus Polemarch stand will like just about wipe the Brute Drones out. They will eventually kill them. They will also kill the Force-grown drones. They did not fight like heroes. Heroes fought like them. They kill like 500 points of my army, but it doesn't matter, because for the remainder of the game, I am just sitting on 3 or 4 zones, comfortably scoring, and there's no way for the city-states to recover. They do their best, they kill a few units by the end of the game. All the Stryx are dead. By the end of the game, all of the Force-grown drones are dead. Stryx are all dead. Avatara are dead. Vanguard Clone Infiltrators are dead. The small units of Brute drones is dead. But the scenario lead is just not surmountable. And in fact, this scenario is going to end. Yeah, looking at my notes here, the score is going to end 77 to 5 Spires way. Which, if that sounds bad, that's pretty rough. So that is probably the most one-sided game score that I've had, I think, playing Conquest kind of period. And it was off the back of a combination of early pressure and just like truly challenging reserve rolls. The scenario also didn't help for my poor opponent. The fact that I know how to play against Satiroy didn't help for my poor opponent. And I think this would have been a more recoverable situation for the city-states with probably like if the Agema had just managed to do all of that stuff like 2 turns earlier. They didn't turn up until turn 5. They were the last turn 5, yeah. No, turn 4 rather. They didn't walk onto the board until turn 4. If they'd gotten onto the board just quicker in the game and committed and done all of that stuff a turn sooner, or 2 turns sooner, it might have preserved the Thorakides. It might have preserved enough that the Incarnate Sentinels had to commit into combat and maybe could be defeated. Frankly, probably not. I'm not sure that the forces that were available on that flank were sufficient, but that was the closest thing to a way out. Was that the Agema, those massive heroics that the Agema pulled, they had to pull 2 turns earlier. Now, would that have won the game? I'm not entirely sure. I feel like with the early picks that I was able to get, I set an attrition advantage and a pacing advantage that I was able to utilize for the entire remainder of the game. I always had not just more activations. More activations in Conquest does not necessarily matter, because like I think in 20 rounds of play, I won maybe 3 supremacy rolls, and some of that is off the back of having more cards than my opponent, and so having a disadvantage on the supremacy roll. But Spires, kind of uniquely, are very good at taking advantage of having a bunch more cards than your opponent. Like, not just one more card, but if as Spires you have like 2 or 3 or 4 more cards than your opponent, just for those critical few turns in the middle of the game, you getting to do things where like you get to make really reliable picks around how your Pheromancer is going to happen, how your range attacks are going to happen, how you're going to concentrate force, where you're going to commit. You get to make more relaxed decisions that you really don't want a Spires player to be making relaxed decisions. You don't want a Spires player to be able to basically be able to say, this unit is going to activate with full certainty that they can't get retaliated on, knowing what their options are. And to do that, like city-states can absolutely fight against that kind of activation advantage, but they need to retain their units. They need to retain their units and then use the strategic stack. And by not being able to, basically by the early losses of the Satiroy, frankly, I think there's a very good argument that the Satiroy should have just walked on and just vanguarded onto this point, right? Just you've got 18 inches of movement, 21 if you come off the strat stack, just get onto the zone. Just don't walk into the VCI. Get onto the zone, score some points, be a regiment with Cleave 1. No, it isn't an ideal use of the Satiroy, but it means that their activation is preserved, their regiment is preserved. Maybe if the Satiroy are sort of sitting around and like if the Satiroy are in this position and then the Minotaurs move up. You've got, like, you can hold this fight. You can maybe fight the Avatara, which would potentially open the hoplites up to move forward. Now, the hoplites are not going to beat this brute drone block. The Pheromancer just asphyxiating the entire unit, and the brute drone's going to town is going to do a ton of damage, particularly with Marksman Clone support. But again, there were these little things that could have been made closer, but they all really didn't matter because of the advantage that I was able to secure early on, in particular the regiment kills I was able to secure. Taking down the Sadaroi, particularly bringing the Thorakides very low and then killing them, these things all added up. And so with those two results and some drops, I was able to secure my second victory, which was enough to win the day. So that was my first event with Spires. I think that was my third and fourth, or fourth and fifth game with Spires ever. I have been really enjoying them. They are a complex faction to play. They're a head scratcher, but I think I'm getting my teeth into them. Next step, absolute Goblin mode under Spires, but we're not there yet, and I certainly don't have the models. All of these models were borrowed from Dan, and big thanks again to him for that. So this was super cool. Really enjoyed this list. More to come. Again, systems that I cover are Infinity, Conquest, and Song of Ice and Fire. If you enjoyed this battle report and want to support me, you can find a link to the Buy Me a Coffee page where you can either pledge an ongoing donation or you can just buy me a coffee for thanks for watching this battle report. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and as always, I will see you next time.